Welcome to Personality. I'm your host, Lori Rawlings of Lori Rawlings and Associates, and welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Bob Wendover, this time on beating burnout. Bob is the president of Common Sense Enterprises, Inc., and he's an award-winning author who has been researching and writing about workforce trends for more than 30 years. Common Sense Enterprises helps employers improve the daily decision-making within their organizations, and its work is based on interviews with more than 3,000 corporate leaders, business owners, and government executives. Bob has worked with firms ranging from the Fortune 500 to small companies seeking to improve their bottom-line results. And in this second part of our series, we're going to be talking about Bob's book, Beating Burnout. It's such a great topic that you've written this book, Beating Burnout, which you can see I've highlighted it a lot because there's so much great information in this book. And it's a huge issue right now because we're more than 2 years into this pandemic, and that's fueling the Great Resignation. And so I'm wondering if you can share some tips for ways employers and employees can manage their burnout.
Sure. From an employee standpoint, one of the things, this comes down to overwhelm, just a feeling of overwhelm most of the time. It is out of control. And too often, especially the average person feels responsibility for getting it all done. Unfortunately, sometimes we're all trying to do more with less. You can trace to some degree, you can trace that back to the recession of 10 years ago where we started, the team of 6 became the team of 5, and everybody started answering their own phone and answering their own email. And then you had the advent of all the other distractions and everything that have gone on. And people get up in the morning and feel overwhelmed from the get-go. So that's part of the issue, and it's a matter of changing habits and routines. And that's part of what I put in the book is the fact that we do have more control than perhaps we perceive. It's just that we need some strategies for doing so. But we also have to understand where it's all coming from. Social media is like any technology, a mixed blessing. It does amazingly powerful stuff for us sometimes, and other times it can be very destructive and time-consuming and energy-draining. And as a result of that, we need to get a grasp on it from that standpoint. From an employer standpoint, it comes down to taking a look at what you're assigning. The way that you're guiding people. One of the things that's going on right now is, of course, this whole issue around hybrid and remote work. On one side, it is saving employers millions and millions of dollars in terms of costs, overhead costs, and rent, and so on. It is also saving them in terms of some other ancillary costs. The challenge, of course, is it is also placed, especially those individuals who don't work well alone or feel like they have been put upon. You have some employees who are saying, well, I appreciate the remote work because I don't have to have 2 hours worth of commuting a day. But then they find themselves working 10 hours a day as opposed to 8 hours a day because it is so close and there's constant messages and they're walking past their work spot, whether it's a bedroom or a separate office or whatever. And they're saying, I'm just going to check this once. And 15 minutes later, they're answering all kinds of things that are crises that perhaps need to be answered, but not necessarily today or right away. But we tend to communicate as employers in very crisis-oriented communication these days. It's kind of like somebody said to me, take your time and develop this report, but have it to me in 2 hours. Well, I actually had a person say, FedEx, express the proposal to me and I'll take a look at it next week. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to spend $50 expressing something to you that you're going to look at in 7 days. But that's the way that we communicate. And, we communicate constantly like that. And that's, of course, fed by the Twitterverse. It's just the instant communication that we have. The fact that all of our commercials now are anywhere from 6 to about 10 or 20 seconds long. And so, and the companies who do that type of thing, they're in the business. The never-ending scroll is one of my favorites. That was something that was invented by Facebook, where you never get to the bottom of the page. And if you're not careful, you can spend 20 minutes trying to get to the bottom of the page. And unless you have the self-discipline to say, I'm not going to do that, that's part of the issue. And then you have on the employer side, ever-ending updates, which frustrate people. And two-factor authentication, every time you want to go into the software, you've got to verify yourself that you exist again. It's stuff like that. And anything that the employer can do to ease not just the technological challenges, but just the communication challenges is going to help people do that. And very frankly, provide some opportunity for balance, to talk about it. Not everybody will. And I don't know that you can set up some sort of counseling process that says, well, if you're feeling overwhelmed, go to counseling. That's not the answer either. Although, of course, you have employee, assistance programs and so on. It's more about supervisors, being able to be in touch with their people. And that's quite hard these days compared to the way it used to, because I can't watch you. If you're working remotely, I can't see you. Or if I can see you, I can't see the stress that's going on and the kids running around in the background and so on and so forth. Or the fact that, you're working out of your bedroom because everybody's been working out of, and those of us with means might have a separate office or have a separate room in which we work. You've got an awful lot of wage and hour kind of people who are shoehorning their business life into their personal life in 1,000 square feet. And that just by its very nature adds to that. And we have to have empathy for that. And, unfortunately, a lot of employers don't necessarily demonstrate that empathy.
Exactly. And one of the things you focus on a lot in the book is the brain science and the physiological processes that happen that are causing this burnout. You talk about decision fatigue and the brain science behind that. And I know I've felt that. I mean, there have been times over the last 2 years where I simply cannot make another decision. And I feel it in my body, like I've had squeezing chest pains a lot over the last 2 years because of balancing work, homeschooling, a young child, working at home, dealing with all of the interruptions, the constant ringing of the phone, the dinging of the text messages, emails. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening inside the body that causes this very real physical feeling of burnout and how to manage that?
Well, in a very brief, basic way, it is based on blood glucose, the foods that you consume. The pancreas creates blood glucose based on the foods. So what you eat, as the computer people say, garbage in, garbage out. If you eat a lot of high fructose and starchy foods, you're going to overload your system. On the same time, you have to have a balanced diet. You have to recognize that every decision, whether it's large or small, consumes a certain amount of that blood glucose. The brain uses about 20% of the glucose that is the sugar energy, if you will, that is created, which means that you have to be aware. So as an example, if I am scrolling and I'm on Facebook, every single one of those little micro decisions that I'm making is consuming a certain amount of, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at that. The same thing is true if you wake up in the morning and there are 150 emails, 99% of which are spam or unwanted. You still have to make 150 decisions saying no, 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 no. That type of thing can be very draining. And so as a result of that, we have to be careful of our diet. We have to get our exercise because that helps the process. And we have to make fewer decisions. One of the things that I have found in interviewing good decision makers is the fact that they make fewer decisions. They conserve their energy. Given a choice between spending a few bucks per month on basic tasks that can be eliminated from their schedule, they'd rather spend that money, given the means, than they would saying, well, I'm going to save $50 a month doing this. Well, if that's going to drain my energy for the real things that I need to concentrate on, that's a no-brainer. And so it's those types of things. Or it is delegating. Parents are famous for complaining about the fact that I told my kid to do it and he didn't do it, and now I'm having to do it, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe a couple of, tough conversations with the kid that says, look, this is your responsibility. You're doing the laundry. You're doing the dishes, and so on and so forth. Just enforcing some of the expectations that we complain about people not doing. Frankly, the same thing is true in the office, and at work. You assign something, it doesn't get done, and then you save somebody's butt. And why are you doing that? Well, to avoid the difficult conversation. Maybe 30 seconds worth of difficult or 2 minutes worth of difficult conversation is going to save you time. But all of that type of thing drains your physical energy as a result of it. And so you get to the end of the day and you feel exhausted. And then you go to bed and you wake up the next morning and the first thing you do is you check your email. And when you check your email, you immediately start draining that sugar energy even before you have breakfast. So it's a vicious cycle if we allow it to happen. So we have to be aware of that. And a lot of people, it goes in one ear and out the other, and they say, yeah, I should really have more balance. Okay, well, that's great. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do to conserve that? The triple shot upside down caramel macchiato does not help. You can't front load it. All that does is overload your system. You have to be smart about it. So anyway, I'm starting to rant, so I'll stop.
No, this is all great information. And, one of the things I love about the book is that it's full of concrete, specific suggestions on here's what you can do to stop this cycle and reset and start over. And so one of the big pieces of advice you have is do not multitask. No one can multitask. Our brains are not set up that way. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the research is out there. You have to define multitasking, because is it possible to run the copier and the washer and talk on the phone at the same time? Yes. So some people could interpret that and say, oh, I'm multitasking. But multitasking is about the attention. The brain can only attend to one thing at a time. And the research basically indicates that there are about a maximum of 6 stimuli that the brain can deal with at the same time. But only one of those is attention. So I can be subconsciously walking, paying attention to what a person is wearing who's walking past me, feeling and adjusting the temperature in the room or on the sidewalk or what have you. But if anything goes on that distracts me, such as a car backfiring or a horn or what have you, the brain automatically flushes all the present stimuli and starts rebuilding that short-term memory. And so as a result of that, it's very difficult to concentrate on more than one thing at a time. Linda Stone, who used to work for Microsoft and is now a technology researcher, coined the term time slicing. So in other words, if you are running the copier, doing the laundry, and talking on the phone, technically, if the copier starts smoking or something goes wrong with the washer, you immediately go to that to find out what's wrong. You're going back and forth. If you are talking on the phone and trying to clear your email, you're essentially time slicing. You're going email, talk, email, talk, email, talk, and you're doing it in microseconds. But once again, every time you do that, you're consuming a little bit of blood sugar because you are changing and making a decision from one thing to the other. You do that a lot, you spend your life on the phone like that, and you're exhausted. Much the same way as a customer service rep, for instance, might deal with, live chat people are a good example. Your average live chat person is dealing with 5 or 6 customers all at the same time. So they are time slicing. They're not multitasking because they're only paying attention to one screen and one conversation at a time, but they are time slicing. And is it any wonder that you say to yourself, gee, I just sat on my butt for 8 hours and yet I'm exhausted? That's the reason why.
Yeah. And I think Zoom makes that far worse than it was before we all started using Zoom 8 hours a day, every day, because just the way it's set up, there's a chat feature and people are constantly chatting in there. Well, they're supposed to be paying attention to the meeting, and people are also, and they're also texting and doing emails while they're, supposed to be focusing on the meeting. And I think that alone is contributing to this major feeling of overwhelm that I know I've been having for the last 2 years. And I would imagine it's a big part of the reason everyone seems so overwhelmed at this point.
Well, just as an example of that, it's funny that you bring that up. If I am or you are on a Zoom call and there are 12 people on that, depending upon the way that we orient our screen, there might be 12 different pictures. As we are listening, as we are perhaps talking, as we are negotiating, whatever we're doing, we're also looking at 12 different pictures. Every time our eyes move from one picture to the next, and we evaluate what that person's doing, whether they're paying attention, whether they're trying to talk, whether we know they're doing their email because we can see where their eyes are, whatever. Each one of those is a little micro decision that is draining energy. And so as a result, or the person who's ghosting us, we know they're there because their presence is in a black screen that says Joe Jones. And we start wondering, okay, what are they doing? Well, that's draining energy because we're wondering, what are they doing and why aren't they paying attention to us? So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah. And so, some of the strategies that you've uncovered by talking to countless successful decision makers, they're simple, but they're hard to implement. And, one of them is keeping your goals at the forefront, and then benchmarking your decisions against those goals. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
What I have found with the individuals that I've dealt with or interviewed is it's about two things. It's really, number one, about discipline. It's setting a goal and then following through on that, having the self-discipline to say, I am going to check my goals. I'm going to benchmark against my goals every single day. Now, they do it a variety of different ways. They might use it. They might have it in their car and, some physical type of manifestation like that. It might be a mantra. You'd be surprised at the number of people have little morning, afternoon, or evening mantras that they use to remind themselves of where they are, what they're doing, what their purpose is, and a way to kind of reinvigorate themselves, especially if they're feeling overwhelmed. Accountability groups. Pretty much every one of them I've dealt with has at least one accountability group. The more successful ones might belong to Vistage or some other type of corporate mastermind where they pay a fee to work with like-minded people on a regular basis, or an affinity group, peer group, or what have you. And as a result of that, they are able to stay focused on their goals because, number one, they're being held accountable, and number two, they're being renewed and being reinforced by other people. It's a matter of habit, and habits are hard to change, and that's one of the challenges that we face. It's one of the reasons why New Year's resolutions don't work, is because when you change habits, you're creating stress until you have changed habits. Until you've extinguished, or you can't really extinguish one, but another one has overtaken it. A better habit has overtaken it. And, you get people on December 31st who say, I'm going to change the following 16 things. Well, that's great. If what you're doing is adding 16 sources of stress to your life on January 1st. That's not a good recipe for making progress.
Yeah, exactly. And you point that out in the book. You have a number of strategies that people use, but you reinforce at the end of every chapter, pick one of these, just one, because you can't do it all at once because habits are so hard to change. And you found that people who are successful decision makers, they recognize that change is difficult, that habits are hard to change, and they have found a way to be comfortable with the discomfort of changing their habits. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they are comfortable with being uncomfortable. In other words, when they are going into a situation where they know there's going to be an awkward, might be correcting behavior or even releasing somebody or dealing with a difficult customer or having a negotiation over a contract or what have you. The first thing they do is they tend to ask themselves, okay, what will success look like? So they outline for themselves, what's a successful outcome? What is it? What are the characteristics of it? If it's a difficult conversation, it means that you are going to be able to both walk away, with a comfortable resolution, a resolution that everybody's accepting, not necessarily happy with, but is accepting. If you are dealing with a proposal, you're going in with one version, the customer might be going in with a different version. Can you come together in a comfortable way where everybody can agree and it's a win-win? So those types of things. The second part of that is saying to yourself, okay, what could go wrong? In other words, what are the things that I need to anticipate? How might the individual react? So if I'm going into a difficult conversation, for instance, the person might say, well, you got me. I was waiting for a time when you were actually going to call me on this, and okay, fine. That's maybe perhaps a good outcome, a good thing. On the other hand, they might burst into tears and say that's just totally untrue. They might get angry. They might try to blame it and dodge the situation and blame it on somebody else. You have to be prepared for each one of those, because if you are, then you're not caught off guard, and you are much closer to getting the outcome that you're desiring. And then number 3, rehearse. I've rehearsed endlessly with my wife when I have to have a difficult conversation. She's done the same thing with me, because we supervise people. We get into those situations like everybody does. But if I can say, will you role play with me about the thing that I have to do, or the conversation I have to have, not only do I get a chance to get the words out the way that I want them to, but she might bring something up that I hadn't thought of, that I need to think of. Because as we know, we go in with a plan, and plan goes, as my, who's the famous fighter? Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. This is part of the problem, because we go in and we know exactly what we're going to say until we're there. And then all of a sudden, all that rehearsal goes right out the window.
But the rehearsal has helped you be flexible and helped you learn to bob and weave and, take the punches as they come. I don't really know much about boxing, so I think I'm using the right terms and analogies there. But rehearsal, I cannot overemphasize how important that is. I do the same thing with my husband, my poor husband. He's had to have endless rehearsals of difficult conversations with me over the years. And it's also a skill that I developed when I was practicing law, is anticipating the arguments that are going to get thrown at me, the hostile questions I'm going to receive, so I'm ready to handle anything they throw at me. And I think it's important to do that when you're having any kind of conversation that could turn into a conflict, or you're going over a presentation that you're giving to a group of people who are going to interrupt and have questions. So I think that's fantastic advice. And then, sort of returning to the topic of the electronic distractions, you've found that a lot of the best decision makers have figured out a way to manage that chaos. Can you tell us a little bit more about their strategies?
One of the most important parts is they're not big participants in it. There are times when I meet somebody who has, significant holdings, runs a $50 million company. I think this is an individual I'd like to connect with. And I go to LinkedIn and I find out that they've got 41 connections and haven't really posted anything since 2019. And so that says to me, okay, well, that's not the way I'm going to connect with that individual, because either they're just not paying attention to it because they don't think they need it, or they have an assistant who's doing that stuff and they never check it themselves. Social media, they don't follow Twitter. They aren't on Facebook. They don't post things on Pinterest. They just kind of keep they don't need to know about that stuff. It's and they recognize also how intoxicating it is. Yet at the same time, so I've seen some organizations that they run have just outrageously good social media, but they're not the ones doing it. But they hired somebody to do their social media for them because they know it's important to be on social media and have a presence and posting things on YouTube and so on and so forth. I do that myself, very frankly. I have a virtual assistant in the Philippines, and I record a weekly piece of content that goes on YouTube and goes on all the other social media. And I record it, and then I ship it off to her, and she takes care of the editing. She takes care of posting it, putting all the stuff. And I have people who come to me sometimes and say, Julia, I love that video that you did. Or I saw that post. And I'm kind of caught off guard because I have no idea what she posts. And occasionally I check it, but it's you have to do a little due diligence to make sure she's not doing something wrong. But most of the time it's just, I've delegated that. So it takes me basically an hour a week to post that piece of content. And then the content is broken down into LinkedIn posts and Twitter, tweets and so on and so forth. But that's something that she does. I don't need to worry about that. So that's the way good decision makers kind of manage social media presence. I check Facebook once a day for about 5 minutes, and I limit it to 5 minutes. And, it's like having I eat a yogurt parfait in the morning. When the yogurt parfait is over, I stop the Facebook. But that's what I do because it's kind of that signal. Those two go together, yogurt parfait and Facebook. And that way I can keep in touch with my friends and colleagues and so on and send a few congratulations here and there. But then I don't look at Facebook for the rest of the day.
Yeah, and I'm living proof that some of these strategies that you're recommending, they really do work in terms of reversing some of the burnout. Because, when I got to the point where I just hit a wall and my health had taken a huge hit, I very consciously scaled back dramatically on my use of social media, on my scrolling through Facebook, reading the news nonstop, tried to chunk in, not constantly checking email, not letting it ping all the time. I turned off the notifications on all of, on Facebook Messenger, the constant pinging on my Mac that it took me a while to be like, oh my God, to turn everything off because somehow I missed something. But I have noticed that I don't have the chronic squeezing in the chest now. I'm able to focus. And when I take time to just do one task at a time, I'm more productive. I make better decisions. And I'm less frantic. So I think these suggestions really work. Are there other big tips that you think people should know about in terms of preventing burnout and recovering from it?
One of the biggest ones is one step at a time, as we mentioned before. I can't emphasize that enough. We tend to try to change too many things because we get backed into a wall. A change comes slowly. Most of the research says that it takes about 30 days to make a successful change of habit. A habit creates a neural pathway. Those neural pathways in our brain never go away, which means that you can fall off the wagon much the same way as an alcoholic or someone who's addicted to cigarettes or some sort of physical addiction can fall off the wagon metaphorically and return to that bad habit very, very quickly. So it's a matter of overriding it. It's almost like a computer disk where when you delete something, it's not deleted. It's still sitting there. It's just that there's a signal that says it's been deleted. But until that particular data spot is overridden by something else, it stays there in the background. The same thing is true of a habit. You don't extinguish habits. What you do is you overwrite them. You overwrite them with a different habit, hopefully a better habit. But it takes about 30 days of repetition in order to really get that solidly in place, because then the brain develops a new neural pathway and accepts that one. The brain seeks comfort. And that's part of what we do. And that's the endorphins, So you get endorphins if you do something that you shouldn't be doing because it's in your comfort zone. So what you need to do is you need to change the source of the comfort, if you will. I've done it, I never eat more than 1 or 2 cookies at a time. Why? Well, because I've told myself and I've told others, I never eat more than 1 or 2 cookies at a time. I love salads. I have salads all the time. Why? Well, because salads are good for me. I wasn't a big fan of salads 20 years ago, but I said to myself, I'm just going to start eating a lot of salads and tell everybody I love salads, including myself. And now, hey, I love salads. So it's a matter of overriding bad habits and replacing them with better habits. So that's one of the most important things because that guides everything else.
That's so interesting that you bring that up, because I think a lot of what people struggle with is when they're trying to form a new good habit and stop an old bad habit. If they fall off the wagon one time, they really beat themselves up and they feel guilty and terrible. And sometimes they just give up. And I didn't realize that the process of forming new habits and letting go of old ones, you're not ever actually losing that neural pathway of the old habit. You're just trying to move away from it and create a new one. So I think that's really helpful information to people who beat themselves up when they are trying to form a new habit, like not checking Facebook constantly or something like that.
Well, it's a lot of, I don't drink a lot. And you go into, in fact, it's sort of almost a source of not pride per se, but, I go to cocktail parties and I'll walk in the door and, hey, let me get you a drink. No, I'll just have a glass of water. If I could put my glass of water, not that I've ever had any problems with alcohol, I just don't drink. But what I've discovered is that takes the edge off, if you will. Not the end. And for me, it's not an edge. Some people have a drink to take the edge off of tension, the edge off of anxiety. I find that when I have a drink, for instance, it takes the edge off of my energy. It takes the edge off of my focus. And I don't like that. But I know that if I go into a place like that and everybody's drinking because that's the culture, everybody's got to grab a beer or whatever, I will grab a glass of water as soon as I can. Because then I have something in my hand I can walk around with. And it discourages me from having, and plus I have a drink in my hand just like everybody else. It's just it happens to be water. And occasionally somebody comes up and says, what is that, straight vodka? But, no, I just say, no, it's water. I just drink water a lot, and who's going to argue with that? We're at a point, if I was a teenager and people were making fun of me, it would be a different situation. But the average adult is not going to criticize you for something like that. And it's a great way to manage the process, if you will. So you have to come up with strategies that work for you. And, as we all know, too many people are worried about what everybody else thinks these days. And that's to a large degree, and especially among teenagers and young adults, that's a very tragic thing. We see the damaging effects of that. But, as you get older, you stop worrying, hopefully, as much about what other people think. I don't care what people think. I respect what people think, or I'm aware of that. But, if you don't like the way I do whatever, okay, well, that's your choice. That's not my choice. And we're probably not going to be real good colleagues, friends, or whatever. But that's all right. That's your choice.
That's great advice. And one other strategy that I think it's really important for people to hear is the importance of planning and then taking breaks, or respites is what you call them in the book. Tell us more about that.
It's important to take a breath. We live in a society that is nonstop 24/7. And as a result of that, we always feel like we're responding to things. It's important to find outlets, whether it's, in my case, it's hiking, mountain biking, doing things that are more physical, reading books. I love reading biographies, for instance. They're escapes for me. Or sometimes taking walks. I walk 2 or 3 miles every morning religiously. Because it keeps me healthy, number one, and number two, it gives me a chance to kind of clear my head before I really get into the day. So you have to have times for reflection like that. There can also be times when I get together with a group of colleagues, like I do once a quarter, and we just sit around and you bring whatever issues there are. With no consequence, just to say, okay, these are the things that are going on, and they speak to me about stuff, I speak to them about stuff. It's all up to us to decide whether or not we want to take the advice or take the insight or what have you, and we just have a good time, have a nice meal, sit there and share, and get up at the end of the day or the end of the evening, and go back to our respective whatever. That's
great advice, and this whole talk has been full of great advice. So I really appreciate you being so generous with your time and your insight. I want to let our listeners know that a link to your website, commonsenseenterprises.net, is in the show notes. You can find Bob there. You can find all of his books, including Beating Burnout there, and you can contact him about working with your company. So Bob, thanks again for being here.
Happy to be so. Thank you for the invitation.